Miquella the Kind is a fascinating antagonist because he is trying to achieve something that the audience is very likely to sympathize with. The world of Elden Ring is one of violence and exclusion. The Golden Order which rules it is tyrannical and rigidly hierarchical, an order of the haves and the have-nots, of the uplifted and the subjugated. Miquella wants to replace that order with something more compassionate and welcoming, where people like the Hornsent, the Omens, the Misbegotten, and the Albinorics are no longer persecuted or mistreated, and everyone will live in cooperative harmony. That sounds pretty good, right? But the methods by which he is trying to create that world are so frightening and so sinister and so manipulative that it transforms what would have been an objectively morally good mission into something far more complicated. By the end of his story, I suspect that a large percentage of the audience is going to feel like they can no longer support the order he would establish, no matter how compassionate or inclusive it might be. Miquella's story speaks to that classic moral conundrum. At what point does our end no longer justify our means? To understand exactly how the writers crafted this story, we are going to follow it from beginning to end. From his mysterious introduction in the base game, through the startling revelations of the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion, all the way to his divine final confrontation. So let's start at the start. Back in the original game, Miquella was one of the most mysterious characters in the story. He was the only major participant in the apocalyptic Shattering War whose ultimate fate remained uncertain at the end of the game. His story begins with his parents, Marika and Radigan, two separate identities occupying the same body, two aspects of the same god. As the child of a single god, Miquella was extremely powerful. He was an Empyrean, meaning he had been selected by the Two Fingers as a candidate to become a god himself, to rule over a new age. However, along with his twin, Melania, he was also born cursed. Melania was infected by an incurable rot, and Miquella was inflicted with eternal youth. As I discussed in my video on Mesmer, in fiction, cursed children are often a reflection of the sins or wrongdoings of their parents. In truth, it was not Miquella and Melania who were cursed, but the Golden Order itself. I think that Melania's curse, her rot, is symbolic of the rotten nature of the Golden Order, its stagnation. On the other hand, Miquella's curse may not sound so bad at first. He gets to stay young forever, innocent and pure. However, it also means that he will never reach his full potential. His story will never exit its prologue. It will always be stuck in this what-if phase. I think his curse is representative of a different kind of stagnation in the Golden Order, a lost potential and an arrested development. According to the Radigan Rings of Light incantation description, Miquella eventually abandoned the Golden Order because it did not have the power to cure his sister. And while it's not explicitly stated, it seems that it did not have the power to cure him either. Instead, he turned to something called unalloyed gold. That means gold without any impurities or flaws. From this, it's clear that Miquella was searching for something better, some alternative to the society his mother and father had built. When he failed to find any such alternative, he attempted to create it himself in the form of the Halig Tree, a second Erdtree, to bestow pure and unblemished blessings upon the people of the lands between, upon the meek and the subjugated equally, perhaps powerful enough to finally cure his sister. The Halig Tree became a symbol to the persecuted peoples of the lands between, a bastion or promised land for both the Albinorics and the Misbegotten, something they looked to for salvation. To bring it to maturity, Miquella watered the Halig Tree with his own demigod blood, but it was not enough. Just like its creator, the Halig Tree was cursed to never reach its full potential. Afterwards, he was torn from the tree's roots by Mohg, a blood god worshipping maniac, who was attempting to establish his own new order, and apparently believed he could use Miquella to achieve that. Meanwhile, his sister Melania was gravely wounded in a battle with Radon, then carried back to the Halig tree, where she unintentionally rotted it from the inside out, and then was ultimately slain by the Tarnished. She died waiting for her brother to return to her, certain that he would fulfill his promises. And so, in the original release of the game, it seemed as if Miquella's story was a tragedy. He was born cursed, he attempted to create a better world but failed, his sister, for whom he abandoned the Golden Order in the first place, is killed in his absence. He becomes just a tool in a madman's twisted schemes grasping for power. And even that fails. No matter what Mohg did, Miquella never stirred, never awoke, never became a god. Miquella's curse could not be overcome, not by anything and not by anyone. In the end, he is left a withered husk in a broken cocoon, his metamorphosis never to be completed. And yet, all of the pieces of Miquella's story just never quite seemed to fit together. Why was Melania fighting Radon in the first place? As the self-proclaimed Blade of Miquella, she must have been doing it in service to her brother, but what could he possibly gain from the defeat of Radon? And why did Mohg become so fixated on Miquella, so obsessed with him? Fans did come up with all sorts of explanations, but none of them ever seemed totally satisfying to me. And finally, what is Miquella's current status? His body remains inside this cocoon, totally unresponsive. Is he even still alive in there? And then there are all these little troubling hints of the sinister in Miquella's story. These hints that there was a darkness hidden deep in his character, that he was not as pure or innocent as he is first presented to be. There is the description of the bewitching branch, which reads, "The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." This suggests that Miquella has the ability to manipulate the feelings and behavior of others at a very deep level. Perhaps people do not follow him because they truly believe in his cause, but because he has woven some sort of spell or enchantment around them. And even more concerning is the description of the Halig Tree's soldier ashes, which reads, "Spirits of common soldiers who carry the sacred light. When weakened, they explode to deliver a last-ditch attack." This was the bitter revelation discovered by the desperate soldiers who awaited the return of their lord to the rotted Halig Tree. May the flash of our deaths guide Miquella's return. According to this description, Miquella's blessings are just as cursed as he is. His blessings are explosive and destructive. In the end, it kills those who received it. But his followers are not bothered by this. They are very willing to die just for the chance of maybe guiding their lord home. That is a fanatical level of devotion. And now that we know he can influence emotions, any loyalty his followers feel towards him is suspect. A picture is being revealed here of a manipulative and corrosive demigod whose cursed nature affects all of his actions, even when he is trying to do the right thing. Miquella's so-called unalloyed gold is potentially just as flawed as the Golden Order he is attempting to replace. And then there is the tantalizing evidence that Miquella, just like his mother, has a split identity, that he is also Saint Trina, the mysterious lost spirit of sleep. For example, the Sword of Saint Trina's description sounds a lot like Miquella, an obscure young child of uncertain gender with hypnotic powers. And Saint Trina is another sort of sinister sounding figure. The description for the arrow of Saint Trina suggests that there is an addictive quality to her sleep, that it is habit-forming, maybe even drug-like. The description of Fivor's cookbook shows how at least one person became captivated with Saint Trina, obsessed with her. The description of the sleep pot describes her sleep as a quagmire, meaning swamp-like, muddy, difficult to escape from, even dangerous. Putting all these descriptions together, there is something unnerving about Saint Trina, something untrustworthy. And if she really is the alter ego of Miquella, it complicates his supposedly pure and innocent image even further. But that is where his story ends in the original game, with just enough information to make him seem potentially dangerous, but not nearly enough to paint a complete picture of his character. Well, luckily, Miquella the Kind plays a starring role in the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. All of our questions have been answered. We can now have a complete understanding of both his virtues and his flaws. By touching Miquella's withered corpse, the tarnish is transported to the Realm of Shadow, the site of both Queen Marika's home and the location where she ascended to godhood. The Gate of Divinity atop a majestic white tower that stretches up into the heavens. It is also the site of an ancient civilization, the Hornsent, which was brutally destroyed in a holy crusade on her orders, and led by Mesmer, another of her cursed children. But as I discussed in my video on Mesmer, it was not just a holy war between followers of different religions, it was also a war of revenge. The Hornsent had slaughtered all of Marika's kin, and in return, after gaining power and establishing the Golden Order, she sent her son to slaughter them. And so the cycle of sin and violence turns round and round and round forever. Until now, because Miquella has arrived in the lands between to finally put a stop to that cycle. After the failure of the Halig Tree, it appears that he is searching for another path to establish his unalloyed Golden Dynasty. This time, he plans to ascend the same white tower that his mother did all those generations ago. He is going to become a god at the exact same spot that she did. But first, he must endure great personal and painful sacrifice. Throughout the Realm of Shadow, you can find these glowing golden crosses, and at each one you can read a handwritten message left by Miquella himself. They say things like, "I abandoned here the flesh of my body, I abandoned here my arm, I abandoned here my eye, here I abandoned my heart." It becomes clear that Miquella is, piece by piece, removing parts of his physical body. These crosses are really gravestones marking the locations where he has permanently abandoned some piece of himself. It seems as if he is on a sort of holy pilgrimage. Pilgrims often engage in self-denial or self-sacrifice while on pilgrimages. They will give up worldly comforts and pleasures, either in order to remove distractions so they can better focus on the divine, or to purify themselves before arriving at a holy site. I think Miquella's motivations are a mix of both, but to a very extreme level. He is not just giving up comfort and pleasure, he is giving up everything. He is not just removing distractions, he is removing his very flesh. He is not just purifying himself, he is breaking himself down into nearly nothing, down into his purest possible form. And it's not just his physical body that he is abandoning. Other crosses have messages which state things like, "Here I abandoned my doubt, here I abandoned my love." Miquella is even purifying himself of his emotions, of his spiritual self, of his fate and his lineage. I have no doubt that this is a very painful process. But why? Why is he subjecting himself to all this suffering? Well, in part, I think it is meant to be a sort of atonement for all the sins of the Golden Order. He cannot purify the Golden Order until he first purifies himself. But also, by abandoning every part of himself, he can also finally abandon his own cursed nature, that which he received as a heritage from Marika and Radagon. That way, when he passes through the Gate of Divinity, he can become the kind of god he wishes to be, a god of unalloyed gold, flawless, perfect, no longer marred by the sins of the past. As you explore the Realm of Shadow, you can meet a group of Miquella's followers. This is a very diverse group of characters who, under any other circumstances, would never be able to set aside their differences to work together. There is Needle Knight Leda and Dryleaf Dane, who are sworn followers of Miquella. There is a Hornsent, a member of the race who were targeted for genocide by Mesmer's crusade, whose family was killed by followers of the Golden Order, and so who despises anyone who has any relation to it. There is Freya, a Redmane and a member of Verdan's personal guard. There is Sir Ansbach, a servant and knight of Mohg, the Lord of Blood. There's Theolier, a tarnished and worshipper of Saint Trina, and also Mohg, who I think is a member of the Forager's Brood, peaceful pests who have been abandoned by the Rot God. Whatever he is, in this group we see a miniature version of the world Miquella would create. In the present, the lands between are divided between all these different factions, who have waged war on each other, who are trying to destroy each other. But in Miquella's world, they would all be working together. Past wrongs and old loyalties would be forgotten. Peace and harmony would reign between them all. And doesn't that just sound lovely? But there is a catch. When you approach the Shadow Keep, you will hear the sound of something shattering, and a message will appear on screen. It says, "Somewhere a great rune has broken, and so too has a powerful charm." This means that, along with everything else, Miquella has abandoned his great rune, and with it, seemingly the last of his power, including his power to manipulate the emotions of others. All those characters I just mentioned were not working together because they had chosen to, but because Miquella had forced them to. They were all trapped under his enchantments. It is essentially a form of brainwashing, or even a kind of slavery. When the charm breaks, their unity is broken too, and they immediately start killing each other. Or more accurately, Letta immediately starts killing people, though the rest of them do get in on the murder party fun eventually. I am planning to do a full video on Letta, so I don't want to get too deep into her character right now. For the purposes of this video, for analyzing Miquella, all that matters is that in fiction, a leader's followers reflect on the character of the leader. Letta is an extremely suspicious and violent personality. The description of her sword seems to suggest that she killed all of Miquella's other knights, and if you follow her questline, she will also kill both the Hornsent and Ansbach after the charm breaks. She is one of Miquella's most devoted followers, even without the charm being active, and her violence reflects back on him. Of course, it is worth noting that many of her suspicions are justified. Ansbach will turn on Miquella, and the Hornsent can turn on Miquella depending on the choices the player makes. But also he can remain loyal and fight by her side, proving her suspicions false. So she's a complicated character too, but again we'll save that discussion for another video. Miquella's second most devoted follower, Dryleaf Dane, an ascetic monk who prizes self-discipline and self-sufficiency, who correctly foresaw the collapse of the Golden Order and has now dedicated himself to unalloyed gold, also reflects on Miquella's character but in a much more positive way. The loyalty of the Dryleaf monks, again even without the charm being active, is evidence of Miquella's virtues, which are real, which do inspire genuine devotion. Not all of Miquella's followers were brainwashed into joining his cause. Many of them really do believe in him. However, it appears that he does force the charm onto even his true believers. As far as I can tell, both Letta and Dryleaf Dane were charmed too, which means that Miquella tries to control the behavior of everyone around him, both friends and foes. At this point, even his sister's undying loyalty to him seems suspicious. I do think he genuinely does want to create a better world. The writers do not give us any reason to suspect those motivations. The problem lies entirely in his methods. And to delve deeper into those methods, let's talk about Sir Ansbach, who, more than anyone else, speaks to those frightening and sinister aspects of Miquella's character. Let's listen to some of his dialogue together and pay attention to the language he uses to describe Miquella, because it is totally different from how any other character talks about him. Okay, here it is.
Kindly Miquella has discarded his great rune. The fog that vexed my aging faculties has been lifted, and follies better left forgotten haunt me once again. Once, in an attempt to free Lord Mohg from his enchantment, I challenged tender Miquella, only to have my own heart rather artfully stolen. I knew not how weak I was. I believed that with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade. I could not have been more mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant, He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying. Righteous tarnished, Miquella the Kind makes my blood run cold. I am loath to admit it, but even at this very instant I wish to run very far away indeed.
In this dialogue, Ansbach reveals the answer to one of the great mysteries of Elden Ring's story. Why did Mohg become so obsessed with Miquella? Well, it turns out, as some fans did theorize, he was trapped under an enchantment by Miquella. Just like all these other characters, he was manipulated into doing Miquella's bidding. This turns the entire story on its head. Before, it seemed as if Miquella was merely a tool being used to further Mohg's ambitions. But it is actually the opposite. Mohg was just a pawn in Miquella's schemes all along. And you might say, well, Mohg is a crazy person. He worships a blood god, his followers are murderers. We're all better off with Mohg being brainwashed by Miquella. We don't want this guy running free. Of course, it's worth noting that Miquella's enchantment did nothing to prevent the Lord of Blood or his bloody fingers from committing their worst deeds. They were still running around killing people all this time. If Miquella wanted to stop Mohg, that would be swell, but he does not. He just wants to manipulate Mohg into furthering his own schemes, his own personal bid for power. And more than that, this reveals just how powerful Miquella's ability to manipulate others really is. Mohg is one of the physically and magically strongest characters in the game. He is one of the demigods. And even he fell hopelessly under Miquella's spell. And that was back when Miquella was still just a demigod trapped in a child's body. How powerful will his brainwashing abilities become when he ascends to true godhood? Will anyone, anywhere be safe from his influence? If Miquella succeeds in his plans, it could mean the end of personal freedom in the world forever. That is a horrifying possibility. And that is not the end of Mohg's story here. After he is killed by the Tarnished, a servant of Miquella abducts his corpse and delivers it to the White Tower. Even after death, Miquella will not leave Mohg alone. The Lord of Blood is not allowed to rest in peace. Even his corpse is just another tool to be used in Miquella's schemes. There is a rank depravity in the way Miquella operates, the way he manipulates others, the way he defiles corpses, the way he sent his sister to hunt down Radahn, which we'll discuss in detail later in this video. It seems that, for him, there is no such thing as a method too grotesque to accomplish his goals. But let's return to Ansbach's dialogue. Before we listen to that clip, I asked you to pay attention to the language he uses to describe Miquella. Every other character uses words like kind, compassionate, beloved, blessed, holy, golden, wise. Ansbach is the first character to offer a different perspective. He uses words and phrases like monster, terrifying, makes my blood run cold. But even he cannot deny the allure of Miquella's influence. Despite everything, he still describes Miquella as kindly, pure, and radiant. He is very frank in expressing his fear. He would rather run as far away as possible than ever face Miquella's power again. And Ansbach is not just some random old man. Freya's dialogue makes it clear that she highly respects his talents as a warrior, and as a champion of Radahn herself, her opinion on the subject holds weight. His scythe describes him as a warrior of extremely high skill, and his incantation speaks to his fearsome reputation on the battlefield. According to Leda, Ansbach was the feared commander of the Blood Knights, and in his attempt to free Mohg from the enchantment, he managed to seriously wound Miquella. She says that he cleaved the demigod's flesh open with his blade. It sounds as if Ansbach came closer than anyone else to actually killing Miquella. Putting all this together, Ansbach is probably one of the most talented and deadliest warriors in the world of Elden Ring, and even he is terrified of Miquella. Miquella's powers of enchantment mark him as the most dangerous of all the demigods, and he's not going to stay a demigod for much longer. By this point in the story, he has already reached the gate of divinity. He has already begun his ascendance. Very soon, it will be too late to stop him. But before we move on, let's talk about Saint Trina. In the shadow of the Erd Tree, it is finally confirmed that Saint Trina is indeed the alter ego of Miquella. It appears that she is not just a disguise, but an actual separate and unique identity existing alongside him in his body, very similar to the way Marika and Radigan share a single body. Along with his flesh and emotions, Miquella abandoned her too in order to purify himself before his ascendance. He leaves her in an old grave, declaring, "Here I abandon my love." According to Letta, Saint Trina's love for Miquella is boundless, and judging by the text at that cross, Miquella probably loved her too. Just like Marika and Radigan, it seems that Miquella and Trina had a romantic relationship, and the logistics of how such a relationship would function are just as mystified now as it was before. So Miquella is not just sacrificing his physical body, not just abandoning his fate and his emotions and his lineage, but abandoning his beloved as well. And by abandoning her, he is sentencing her to death. When we find Saint Trina, she is in the process of slowly withering away, her once light purple lilies settling into a darker and deeper velvet, representing a deeper and deeper sleep from which she will eventually never awake. This is a form of murder. Miquella is killing her in order to ascend to godhood. His goal is to create a more perfect order than the one his mother established, but it is beginning to seem as if his path to power is being marred by just as many sins as hers was. In the world of Elden Ring, it is impossible to seize power without getting your hands dirty. Someone else will always have to suffer to pave the way for your climb to the top. And in this case, it is Saint Trina who has to suffer. But before she dies, Saint Trina can speak to the Tarnished, and her dialogue is pretty fascinating, so let's listen to it together.
Miquella, stop. Don't turn the poor thing into a god. Godhood would be Miquella's prison, a cage divinity is beyond saving. You must kill Miquella. Grant him forgiveness.
Saint Trina begs us to kill Miquella, not for revenge, but to save him from himself. She says that godhood will be a cage from which he will never escape except through death. So what does she mean by this? Why would godhood be a prison? Well, the only other example of a god we have in this world is Queen Marika, and it turned out pretty miserable for her. The world she built was cursed. Half of her children transformed into monsters, the realm was full of suffering, and even death was not an escape, because by her own orders, the rune of death had been sealed away. I think Marika did become trapped in the golden order she herself had created. She was even about to lose control of her own body to Radigan, to be forever trapped in a life she did not want anymore. I will discuss this in more detail when I do a full video on her character, but I think this may explain why she shattered the Elden Ring, why she destroyed the very world she had built. Because, as Saint Trina says, godhood is a prison. It is very possible that Miquella will fall into a similar sort of trap, that eventually he will be stuck in a hell of his own making, unable to escape, trapped in a world of perfectly behaved, brainwashed zombies who are absolutely and totally devoted to him, no matter what, where nothing ever changes, a world just as stagnant as the golden order that preceded it. Saint Trina's final line, "Grant him forgiveness," is more opaque. Grant him forgiveness for leaving her to die, grant him forgiveness for brainwashing a bunch of people, for what he did to Mohg and Radahn, for sins of the Golden Order which he is taking on himself. Ultimately, it does not matter. Whatever he is being forgiven for, it can only end in his death. Now, let's fast forward to that end, to the final confrontation atop the White Tower. When we reach the Gate of Divinity, we find Radon, his soul reborn in Mohg's corpse, healthy and young again, no longer infected by scarlet rot, returned to his prime. So what's going on here? Why has Miquella brought Radon back to life? Why did Miquella send his sister to hunt down Radon in the first place? To answer those questions, let's look at the description for the remembrance of a god and a lord, which reads, "In their childhood, Miquella saw in Radon a lord, his strength and his kindness that stood in stark contrast with their afflicted selves. And so Miquella made his heartfelt wish, that Radon would one day be his king consort. In his childhood, Miquella became fixated on Radon, obsessed with him, obsessed with this idea of Radon becoming his consort when he finally ascended to godhood. He was never able to let go of that obsession. After the battle, we can actually view one of Miquella's memories, and in this memory we see him make a vow. And as you watch, pay attention to Radon's response to this vow, and what that response tells us about Miquella's character. Okay, here it is.
Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place.
Alright, did you catch Radon's response? No, you didn't, because he's not in this scene. He never speaks during the battle either. I've seen a lot of people who are confused as to why this memory was included in the story at all. If all it does is communicate to the audience that Miquella wanted Radon to be his consort, well, we already knew that. It's totally unnecessary to repeat it again. But I think what this memory is actually meant to show is Radon's lack of response, his lack of participation in this vow, that the supposed promise was completely one-sided. We hear a lot about how Miquella wants Radon to become his consort, but we never once hear what Radon thinks about all this. As far as I'm concerned, there is no reason to believe Radon wanted any part of Miquella's plans. In fact, there is good reason to believe otherwise. During the Shattered, Radon never seems to attempt to join Miquella's side. Instead, he is off doing his own thing. He is fighting his own war for his own reasons. He lays siege to Leyndell, fails, then runs home to Caelid, where Melania hunts him down, fights him to a stalemate, and when she realizes she cannot defeat him in battle, she unleashes the Scarlet Rot to destroy him that way instead. Way back in the original story trailer for Elden Ring, we could see that Melania was whispering something to Radon before she unleashed the Scarlet Rot, but we never knew what until now. The description of the young lion set finally reveals her words. She said to him, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." I think that Radon refused to be his consort, and we can only guess at his reasons for saying no. Maybe because the world Miquella would create would be a tyrannical nightmare, or maybe because Radon had his own vision of the future, his own dreams, but either way, Miquella was unable to persuade or charm his desired consort into doing what he wanted. But still, he could not let go of his obsession. Miquella is the kind of character who gets what he wants, one way or another. So he sent Melania to kill this stubborn version of Radon so they could then bring his soul back to life in a more compliant form. A version who would do what he was told, who would accept Miquella's embrace. I think the Radon we fight at the top of the tower is even more of a zombie than the one we fought in Caelid. This is a Radon who has no personal freedom or will at all. This is the future of the entire Lands Between if Miquella is successful. To end this video, let's watch the cutscene where Miquella returns to the Earth as a god. Here it is.
Lord brother. At long last you are returned. Tarnished one. Aspiring lord of the old order. If you have known sin, if you grieve for this world, then yield the path forward to us. To I, Miquella, and my promised consort, Radahn.
I have spent most of this video examining the sinister aspects of Miquella's character, but it is important to remember that From Software wrote him to be a complicated antagonist. Miquella is not pure evil. There's no such thing as pure evil in the world of Elden Ring. This is a morally gray story about morally gray characters. Miquella is offering something that no other character in the game does. A gentler world. He cares. He really does. He grieves for this cursed world. He will atone for its sins. The Light of Miquella incantation description states that he wishes to accept all that was and will be. There will be no more exclusion in his order. Everyone will be welcomed no matter what. The Circlet of Light description states that this would be an age of compassion instead of order. It reminds me of the Minor Erdtree incantation, which is described as only the kindness of gold without order. I think that is what Miquella is offering too, and he has the power to make it happen. This is the only time in the game where we face a true god in battle at the height of their power. By contrast, when we confront Radagon, his body has long been shattered and weakened. The power on display in this fight is meant to seem incredible, overwhelming, greater than anything we've seen in this game before. This fight is like a continuous string of massive golden laser explosions. It is ridiculous. But that is not the true source of Miquella's might. Those golden lasers are just the icing on the cake. The truly amazing part of the battle is this grab attack, when Radahn holds us in place while Miquella gently embraces us, speaks softly, and then our character just gives up. The tarnish bows down, and these words appear on the screen. Heart stolen. I've never seen anything like this in a From Software game before. In this moment, the game actually takes control of your character away from you. His story is all about that classic moral question. At what point does our end no longer justify our means? Does the compassionate new order Miquella wishes to establish justify all of the horrific things he has done? The murder, the manipulations, the brainwashing. The game does not offer any answer because there is no answer. It is up to each individual player to decide what a better world is worth. I expect that a lot of people are going to say no. Freedom of choice, freedom of thought, freedom of feeling are things that are valued by everyone everywhere. And the idea of a society where those are erased is abhorrent to most people. In Miquella's world, even your thoughts and feelings would be taken from you. His would be a tyranny exponentially more rigid and absolute than that of the Golden Order. Sure, there would be no more violence or persecution, but at what cost? Of course, Miquella's story also begs the reverse question. Is it worth living in a world as miserable and cursed as the lands between, just so long as you still have freedom of choice? The audience will witness a lot of really terrible suffering in their journey here. How many of the characters we encounter might be willing to give up their freedom if it meant escaping from all this misery? Getting to put the ravages of an endless war behind them, to live lives that are happy and peaceful and safe, even if bereft of liberty. Throughout history, many different people in many different places have chosen to live under despotic regimes, willingly given up their freedoms in exchange for peace or prosperity or for whatever else. There's nothing unusual about that choice. People make it all the time. ask yourself, how terrible would your life have to get before you were willing to give up your most intimate and most personal freedoms? When would you cross that line, if ever? That's what makes Miquella such a fascinating antagonist. His Age of Compassion is just an exaggerated and fantastical version of real-world despotism. There are Miquellas out there in the real world, leaders who are persuasive, manipulative, but also benevolent, even well-meaning. There are leaders out there so charismatic that they can convince people to gladly give up their own freedom in exchange for a supposedly better world. Sir Ansbach said it best, there is nothing more terrifying.